Hello and welcome back to another video. Today I'm doing the 25.14 top plane tier list. So if you enjoy my content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes this patch, a couple of quality of life, a couple of champion adjustments, and some item adjustments to kind of go alongside it. Nothing too huge or meta warping, but generally just some stuff which they didn't really want to touch before MSI, but now that MSI is over, they can kind of go and adjust them. So let's get into it. The D tier is going to lead off with Maokai still. I don't recommend this champion. I just don't think he provides enough to kind of what his class desires to be. Like, I think there are just better tank options which I recommend over him. He hasn't got a great laning phase. He doesn't scale as well as some of the other tank options. You can kind of make him work. I've tried different variations of like phase rush and grass builds. I've tried the tank variants. I've tried the AP button style variants. I think that is a sweet spot where you can kind of concoct something which can work in certain drafts, but I'd overall just recommend avoiding him. I think this champion just isn't good enough to really consistently pilot, and for that I just don't recommend him as a pick to kind of learn in the top lane at the moment. Udyr's builds primarily consist of both the Ravenous and the AP variant, the Liandry variant. There are the two builds currently existing on him. The Ravenous variant looks and has just been performing badly for a long time at this point. The Liandry variant isn't too bad. Like, I think the Liandry variant could probably bump him up to the C tier, like a Grasp Liandry, kind of like more Bruiser-esque, AP Bruiser-esque style Udyr build. I don't really recommend the champion at the moment. I think he is pretty deceptively hard, and trying to get your head around the form swapping mechanics and then trying to kind of like, just learn a basically new skill on a champion which just might not be as familiar and might not be as pickable in so many spots. I just don't really recommend it at the moment, so he does also remain in the D tier. In the case of Smolder, I think he can work as a niche counter pick to maybe something like a Cassante blind. We actually saw it, I believe, at MSI. Mirren brought it out against a Cassante, I want to say, and it did prove to be quite a beneficial pick. I want to say it was Murin. But all that to say, though, I don't really recommend him in solo queue. I think he has a different spot in competitive. Like, obviously, the kind of Smolders or like solo lane Smolders of the past against like your Yones and your Cassantes just don't really exist that much at the moment. And in solo queue, he just doesn't perform that well. So I'd recommend avoiding the champion. In the case of Nidalee, she got affected by the Grasp nerfs, but received some direct buffs, to try and push her as like an AP option in the jungle. I have removed her for the moment as she just isn't. I mean, I'll leave Nidalee for one more patch, but I don't recommend this champion. I think she's too hard to pilot for like 99.9% of the player base, and even in the really elite, like competitive, like top of challenger kind of players, she isn't as popular as she was, and that usually when at that level implies that they just aren't as strong as picks. I think if you can pilot this pick incredibly well, then there is a spot where you can make it work, and she can be really abusive, but you have to really maximize the value of this champion in lane, because if you don't, she'll just get outscaled by almost everything in the game. Like, she might just be the most aggressively early game skewed lane bully when playing her in the top lane, and for that, I just don't really recommend her for the average player base. And moving on to the C tier, and we lead off with Varus, who's still a fine top laner and has some relatively egregious moments where you can either just like outright one-shot someone with like an AP variant, or you can just go like the standard Ginsu's, maybe even into like the Hullbreaker variants, which can exist. Bork being buffed this patch and Kraken being buffed this patch do help him if he does so like opt into them. But I also think the reward isn't quite as good anymore. The nerf he directly receives of base armor does affect him against some of those more aggressive like AD champions in the top lane. But you can still use him as an anti-tank, and I think if you can like flex him about, or you're like a auto-filled ADC who plays a lot of Varus, he can work here. So I am going to leave him as a C tier option, and once again, going to Murin, he is someone who also plays Varus top and can make it consistently work. Cassante sits in the C tier. He's just too low agency at the moment. The champion is obviously early game skewed, and he's an early game skewed tank, which is nice for like elite and competitive, but not that great for just average Edo solo queue. He's relatively hard to play, and he just doesn't have the agency which I like recommend over other tanks over him for. Jace is just an incredibly hard champion to pilot. I think if you can pilot him extraordinarily well, he's like an elite mainstay. This champion does perform really well in elite brackets. For average brackets, though, it just isn't a pick I'd really ever recommend. The grass build being nerfed also does affect him more in this bracket of play, because it was more forgiving, and the phase rush build, the Yomu's variant, just aren't going to allow you the room to make mistakes. But if you pilot incredibly well, are incredibly rewarding builds to opt into. Rumble sits in the C tier, also an incredibly elite skew champion. He's number one, or like he's number one alongside Gwen. Like competitive champions at the moment. Like these are like the considered tier 1 or like Z tier competitive options. I don't recommend him so much for solo queue. I think he's just too hard to pilot for most players. But if you're very comfortable on him, you consistently make him work, then yeah, he can be a good way of climbing. He has a bit more agency than some of the other options lower down, but isn't a pick I'd recommend learning so much at the moment, because I do think he is maybe not short term, but like long term will probably end up getting changed, because he is beginning to kind of linger in this spot where he has been a competitive mainstay for quite a long time and is getting to the point where he's pretty not great for like the average player in solo queue. Swain, I think, as a counter pick is still fine. I don't really recommend him out of counter pick situations, and if you don't already play him, I don't really recommend learning him at the moment, but he's there as an option for you. Tom Kench has really suffered just from nerfs over time, and Hearts still being nerfed, Bork being buffed this patch. It's just another blemish. This pick is just not recommendable at the moment. I think if you already play him, you're an OTP, you can make him work. There are certain like kidnap, phase rush, or like just standard variants of builds with this champion, but he relies kind of quite heavily on just understanding his lethal thresholds really aggressively, and those are traditionally like where you get into like the OTP range, and for that I just don't recommend the champion at the moment. Alawi's been pretty heavily neglected. I do think Riot will end up changing this champion soon because of just how much he's been neglected. I think in maybe some really good scenarios you can play this champion, like really like well placed, kind of like very heavy play into you kind of champions like have been drafted into you, then you can make this pick work. Outside of that though, and outside of being OTP, you probably just don't really want to be playing this champion at the moment. She's just been kind of neglected for a while. Nah hasn't been that performing in solo queue for a while. Like, this champion has also kind of found himself in a not competitively dominant state, but not performing that well in solo queue. The champion can still function nicely as a counter pick, but I also think the rise of Aurelia at the moment is just also a pretty heavy tag for him. Like, you probably don't want to be picking Nara at the moment. Other picks within the C tier are Yone and Vayne. These two picks might move up to the B tier going into next patch. They are both going to benefit from Bork being buffed. Actually, I'll leave them in the low end of the B tier. I think these two champions will benefit enough, and they were top of C tier beforehand, that they can be bumped up to the B tier at the moment. Plus PD being buffed does help Vayne and Kraken Slayer if you do so much want to opt into that build. Obviously, Vayne in top lane has like a variation of builds where she can go like the one we've seen, like Trinities, we've seen Untals, we've seen Bork, Ginsu variants. I think it comes down to comfort, what you need within the game, and yeah, I'll move her up to the low end of the B tier at the moment. But these two champions can either stay here, move down in the next patch, depending on kind of how they continue to telegraph throughout the changes. The other picks within the B tier rather. So Gwen, since it's a low B tier option, she's really kind of like lingering towards the low end of like not that performant for the average player. I think in Elite she's still an incredible option. She is obviously still perceived as being the number 2 or number 1 option alongside Rumble. Very clearly, she's very blindable in her current state, doesn't have a huge amount of losing matchups. There are some niche ones which people have brought out. We've seen like sets. We've I believe Beppo took set into Gwen. We saw like Warwick's into Gwen's. There are like some things we've seen, like Fiora into Gwen. I believe Bin took that one and showed that it can definitely be a very strong way of like oppressing the Gwen. And in solo queue, yeah, I don't think this champion performs anywhere near as well. I just don't really recommend the pick as much here. Other picks from the B tier are the likes of Gangplank, who's just a very hard champion to pilot. Since it's a low B tier, the buffs were nice, but probably not enough to really cement him as like a good pick for average Elo bracket. And Bessa, kind of sits in this realm of being like really good in Elite. Like, almost everyone in Elite has Ambessa as a champion within their pool. Like, I play competitive, and I've played so much Ambessa because it's basically mandatory. Like, you have to be able to play Ambessa because this champion works in so many different drafts. There are so many like spots where you can play her and get value out of her. Like, traditionally, all you need is one immobile carry on the enemy team, and this pick will you get value out of this pick, and that is just such a strong aspect of the champion. She has like great tools to do with tanks, great tools to do with squishies. You can opt into electrocute and grass variants. Like, I recommend learning Ambessa, but she isn't as performant for this Elo bracket because she's just a hard champion to pilot in a lot of spots. Volibear sits within the B tier. I actually think Arvim is a mid to high end B tier. The Cosmic build for sure bumps him up to the A tier, maybe even S tier. Like the Cosmic Volibear does really well at the moment. The Robuster's patch probably will lead him back to going towards Roa, even though it will still be a worse item on him. Go Cosmic Rush on this champion. It's very strong in its current state. This pick pretty underrated at the moment. Gygo sits within the B tier. He's fine. I do think he's kind of lingering in this like OTP territory at the moment, where if you're very comfortable piloting this champion, you can kind of work around some of the issues maybe some other players like have when playing this champion, such as like mana cost, like just comboing correctly, making sure you're going the right build in the right game. And yeah, I think if you do, he definitely like gets better as an option, but he's not as strong as he has been in like previous iterations. He's just a solid option at the moment, a bit below the bar for like average players. Malphite, I also think probably should be towards the high end of the beta at the moment. I do think in counterpick scenarios, this champion is incredibly good. Like, he can be a great neutralizer. I think if you kind of opt into maybe a bit more damage, or you're like itemizing correctly on this champion, he does perform well. Like, there is no doubt about it. Like, Malphite can be a performance champion. I do think when you are has always been like my biggest issue of like counterpick tanks is you are using like a counterpick sort for a champion which just isn't going to give you as much agency as a carry champion used as a counterpick. Like, if you can play a counterpick Fiora over a counterpick Malphite, you should. Like, you should play Fiora because that champion is just going to have more agency within the game. That being said though, Malphite's an easier champion. It's average Elo brackets, and for that, he definitely has value. So Malphite, I'm also going to move towards the higher end of the B tier. Yeah, so we got nerfed this patch, but Bork got buffed. It meant that he treads relatively neutral. I think if you're good at him and you can use him as a counterpick, he's still a very solid option. I still have him as like a B tier pick at the moment. Silas, I also think if you can use him as a counterpick, is a pretty solid top laner. There are like Conqueror variations, Grass variations, Electrocute variations, Burst style builds, Bruiser style builds. Personally, I recommend just going the Rocket Belt into why can't I think of the second item? Rocket Belt into Riftmaker variation. That one looks to be his most performant in the top lane in most games. That being said though, like, if you're very comfortable with the champion, you have the flexibility of going a lot of different things. And I do have him as like a B tier option because I think he can be a valuable counterpick. Maybe should be like a lower B tier option though. Aurora, I'm also kind of leaving in the high end of the B tier at the moment. I think Aurora top is really oppressive in the right matchups, and especially if you're really comfortable with champion. That being said though, she is definitely hard to pilot. She's a bit elite skewed in her current state, but definitely benefited from the buff she received more recently. Darius, also towards the higher end of the B tier, got buffed this patch, performing better with those buffs. Not quite escaping the B tier. I still think you need to have sunk a lot of time to him, pick him in the right spots, but he really thrives in those spots now. Like, if you can play him in the spots where you feel comfortable playing him, know you can get value out of the champion, he's like a definite pick now. Like, the buffs really were nice for him, gives him more healing, allows him to team fight better, and those are big things for a champion like Darius. Camille, I think it's just a counter pick. Is fine. She's not as performant as she has been in the past, and she's definitely like a 1-2 item spiker champion. Like, you aren't her laning phase is definitely a lot weaker compared to a lot of other champions. It's about working around that. If you've sunk a lot of time into the champion, you can, but I don't really recommend the pick as much at the moment. Nasa sits within the B tier. The thing popping up is this is probably both low and mid elo are good brackets for him. Like, they are where he performs best as a champion. He can win certain lanes really hard. KO lane is always one which I'll recommend playing him into. That being said, you won't see a lot of blind KOs, especially at the moment. I don't think KO's as popular as she has been. But Nasa's not in the best of spots. He should be higher. Like, he should be a mainstay A tier option for like mid elo. Right now, I think he's a slight bit on the bar. I do have him as a B tier pick at the moment. Ornn has mana issues. Being said though, I think Ornn Ornn's in a weird spot at the moment where I don't think the champion's so much bad. He's just not as high agency. There are clear issues with the champion. Like, the itemization feels pretty rough. There are ways of working around it, and I do think being open-minded and flexible with what you do at the moment. Like, I played a game of Ornn yesterday where I was playing like Kanik, Rook and Rush with like executioners because I was playing into Vladimir and like running different kind of I was running like Airy, and I was running different things to kind of like work around the matchup, and it was doing quite nicely. Like, the champion does have that flexibility within him at the moment. That being said, though, I just want them to buff Fimbulwinter. I think Fimbulwinter has just been over-nerfed, and I think a champion like Ornn, who has mana issues at the moment, should be a champion who wants to be purchasing Fimbulwinter. So, be nice to see some changes there. And overall, I think tank itemization at the moment just feels pretty unsatisfying, which is why maybe my perception of a champion just isn't as like I'm not as confident recommending tanks at the moment, because I just don't think they have the same level of agency, albeit they are traditionally easier and have more room for error than some of the other options in the list. So like Sion, for example, best blind pick tank in the game at the moment. Sion, very good at MSI. I play a ton of Sion. Like, I default on Sion as like my competitive blind pick option. For solo queue though, he just doesn't have the agency you want in a champion in the top lane at the moment. You want a champion with a bit more like snowball potential, a bit more late game agency, which can also still function early game. Like, Sion's whole thing is he is a great like early mid game neutralizer, which is interesting, because obviously he's perceived as being this late game scaling tank because of the way his W scales, which is actually not true. Like, he just isn't that great of a scaling tank, albeit he can scale nice into comps, but that's just, like, tanks can scale. I mean, all tanks can to an extent scale into comps if they don't have the tools to do with them. Anyway, I digress. Sion, very good early laning phase tank. Like, he will neutralize most matchups and win a lot of matchups just outright. But all that to say, though, I don't think he has the agency some of the other champions have, which is why I don't really recommend him as high as some of like the A and S options. If you want something really good at what he does, though, then yeah, Sion is like best in the business. Garen is going to benefit from the PD buffs this patch. I still don't rate him that highly. I still think the champion has issues, and he definitely lost a substantial amount of damage. But yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about the fact that like a PD buff with 2% more movement speed, 5% more attack speed will help him. So definitely something to be aware of if you are playing Garen at the moment. And he could probably be bumped up maybe to the high end of the B tier as well. Kled, I'm going to drop towards the low end of the B tier. I've played 2 games of Kled yesterday. I definitely feel like the champion has lost damage. I've actually played through like 4 variations of Kled. I played the Sunfire Titanic variation back at like 3-4 years ago, when that was egregiously overpowered. Like, that is the strongest variation of like almost any champion has been. They obviously nerfed it quite quickly because it was just so strong. Like, it was a pentakill machine. That's how overpowered that. Like, old Sunfires with the like ramping damage, and the Titanic with the stacking HP. Like, it was like Overlords and Titanic in one. I played through the Assassin and the Gore Drinker variations of Kled, and right now I think this variation of Kled isn't horrible. Like, I think he's a low beta champion, but I do notice the missing damage. The champion feels a bit smoother to play though, and I think if he maybe had a slight buff, then like going into next patch, then I do think he'll come out top. But he might not need it. He might in time, like as people adjust to the new play style, do better. And yeah, I'm gonna leave him as a B2 option for the moment. I just think he's slightly under the bar in his current state. Wukong is incredibly unpopular. I think as a counter picker, if you're an OTP, you can still play him. Outside of that, though, I just don't recommend this champion. But he's still fine. I will have him as like a low beta option, maybe like here, for example. Trundle, I do think if you're, I mean, obviously Kagru's always a good example for a Trundle OTP. I think he's fine. He's just very linear in what he does. Split pushing isn't that great at the moment as a playstyle, which is why a lot of split push champions have recently had team fighting buffs. Like, Yorick is a better team fighter now. Fiora is a better team fighter now. Trundle had a pillar buff recently. You can kind of see the direction Riot is going with a lot of these changes, and like Nasa's not being that performant is a pretty good indicator. So Trundle, I think he sits towards the high end of the B tier at the moment. Not a pick I really recommend unless you're very comfortable on him and kind of understand what matchups you want to take him into. Rise is the other champion within my B tier. He benefited from the Roa buffs this patch. Obviously 100 mana on Roa is going to benefit Rise more than any other Roa champion. Is it enough to push him up to the A tier? Maybe. He was towards the high end of my B tier, which I still think he is in his current state. But if the buffs prove to be enough, like, I will bump him up to A tier next patch. So he's definitely a champion which is like worth watching. And if you're comfortable picking him as like a counter pick in a lot of situations, I do think Rise is a pretty good top laner at the moment. That being said, you have to come correctly on this champion, and he's not as easy to play as some of the other picks. So it's why he's not quite as high. Riven. Okay, so Riven is an interesting one. I think the 2 biggest things to watch this patch are Riven and Ziggs. So Ziggs really benefited from his buffs. I'll talk about that more when I get to like the mid and the bot lane Toplane tier list. Riven really took a big hit this patch, like especially like win rate wise. It's not always the full picture, but she has lost 2.5% win rate this patch, which is meaningful. I haven't moved her quite as aggressively down as maybe the win rate suggests. I am curious to see kind of why that's happened, because on paper the buffs are more mid to late game skewed, which I mean, and like they're passive skewed, so like passive skewed nerfs I would presume are elite skewed, whereas like a late game passive nerf would probably be more mid to low elo skewed. So I think it's to sit back and like observe what the champion's like. If you still like, if you're a Riven OTP, you're still going to play Riven no matter what power level she's at. So it probably doesn't matter the change, albeit you'll probably be losing more games. If you don't already play Riven, might not be the time to pick the champion up. She's probably just a pick worth watching. Maybe her win rate will like climb back up as people kind of like adjust to the damage change. Maybe she'll stay lower win rate and she will end up getting buffed. Like it's just a sit back, kind of see how the changes kind of like fall. Right now though, she's definitely telegraphed as being a considerably more considerably weaker. So not as good in average elo brackets. Still might be fine in like elite. Like Riven was already a very elite skewed champion, so I'm going to leave her in the B tier at the moment. Moving on to the A tier, then we lead off with Singe. Choose doing all right. I think if you're an OTP, you will play Singe and you'll still be very comfortable in his current position. He traditionally never falls out of the A tier for more than a patch. Riot will buff him, so he's like one of the better top laners, because he has a pretty niche audience and they are usually pretty comfortable sitting as an A tier. Like he's pretty comfortable sitting as like an A tier champion, because he also traditionally doesn't support the ban rate to be like a B tier. Like his ban rate never usually goes up enough when he's in the A tier to kind of warrant like an instant nerf, so he's like perceived as not being that egregious for the game. Heimerdinger, I hate laning against this champion as Argot. Like, this is one of the more miserable matchups you can run into. That being said, though, I mean, I think Heimerdinger has good spots. He's a good laner. Like, he can be incredibly oppressive against certain champions. Traditionally, he's only played by OTP, so like I think if you're very comfortable with this champion, you'll continue to play him. I think he has cool tricks which you can like play around, and I think in the right spots he can be very, very like egregious. But you need to put a lot of time to him because he's very unique in the way he functions. I miss Tryndamere. He sits on the end of the beta at the moment. I don't really recommend Tryndamere, but I can appreciate the fact that he can be quite powerful in the right spots and can definitely in the right compositions look really, really like potent, because some teams just don't really have the tools to like shut him down on sides, and his ultimate is a very oppressive ability. Cassiopeia sits within the A tier. I think if you're comfortable playing Cassiopeia as a counter pick, she can be quite valuable. I think if you're not, then you're probably not going to play her, which is why I only have her rated as like a low A tier option at the moment. Teemo, might have slightly underrated Teemo. I've had him as a low A tier. I think he might be more like a mid to high end A tier option actually. Like he's pretty good in this elo bracket. This is like the elo bracket he's going to perform best in. He's a pretty solid scaling pick. Has tools to kind of bully out in the laning phase. I think he has pretty solid agency for a champion and can be a good counter pick. So I do have him as a mid to high end A tier option at the moment. Zac, I think is fine. I think if you're comfortable playing Zac, you can continue to play him in the top lane. If you're not comfortable playing Zac, then you probably won't play him. Like, he fits alongside, like, your Heimerdinger and Singe, where he's primarily just played by, like, a OTP base, and I think they will continue to play him, like, whatever the weather. But, yeah, I mean, I think there are spots where he can definitely work, and traditionally he's been, like, played as, like, an anti-tank because he does a lot of damage to, like, he does a lot of damage to tanks, whilst, not, like, sustaining through, like, the damage they can do, and, like, never really being able to get lethal onto him. So that is kind of the value of the champion, at least how I perceive it. Quinn, I think, is in a pretty solid spot at the moment. Once again, kind of sits in this, like, OTP kind of area, where if you're very comfortable playing Quinn, you can play on the top lane and traditionally perform quite well. Akali, I think, is a great counter pick. I think if you're looking for an AP asset in the top lane, she's actually one of my higher recommendations at the moment. I think her, like your Vladimirs and your Kennins, as long as you have one of these in your pool, I think you should be pretty solid at the moment. I think Kennin's a really good champion, pretty underrated. Like he's just traditionally unpopular though. I think Vladimir's a champion, really, really strong counter pick. Can be struggle into some of those like Kaenic Rock and Rush tanks and certain champions which can opt into MR quite easily. But he can just 3D scale, and as long as you can just like get backline access, or you can just output a lot of damage in team fights, you can usually just get good value out of this champion. Aurelia, I mean, I'm going to leave her as a mid to high end A tier option at the moment. I'm pretty sure this champion's busted in Elite. Like, I I hate laning against Aurelia. She might be my least favorite champion to lane against at the moment. She is so oppressive in what she can provide. And Riot seem to just, every time they buff this champion, they just seem to go for early game buffs, which, I don't know, something about this champion feeling really, really uncontestable for like 80% of the top lane roster. Not a fan, but I mean, I'll be interested to see if her ban rate rises, especially with Bork being buffed this patch, Kraken being buffed this patch. She just gets even stronger from this, and I'm not a fan of the direction she's been taken in. But yeah, if you can exploit that early game, like you can take that and like snowball, close out the game. She's an incredibly good champion at the moment. She's in a really, really good spot. She's hard to pilot. If you don't have good ping, or you're not comfortable closing out games, then she will fall. Like, she falls as an option. She is as good as the pilot of the champion. I think if you can pilot her well, she's like the best pick you can go to in the game at the moment. I think if you pilot her badly, she's just an avoid. Like, you don't want to be playing this champion if you can't pilot the pick well. What else have we got here? So Pantheon, I have him as a A tier option. I think he's I like Pantheon as an option. He has issues, like obviously he doesn't scale quite as well as some of the other options. That being said though, I think in the right matchups he can do fine, like point and click CC combined with a global ultimate does give him inherent value. He's a flex pick in his current state. He wins most lanes with the fact that his Q is such an oppressive ability, and I'd have him as a pretty solid A tier option. Put some time into him and you should be able to get good results out of the pick. Shen, I think, is a good counter pick option at the moment. I have him as like a mid to high end A tier option. Obviously his ult's an incredibly frustrating ability for certain like classes within the game. Like, he can really, really shut down some of those snowball orientated compositions, which can be quite rewarding. Works really nice with hyper carries as well. As long as you get a good lane matchup, I think this pick is a pretty good option at the moment. Cho'Gath, I really like as a pick in his current state. I think his scaling, combined with his pretty unassailable laning phase for a lot of champions, does make him a really valuable pick. His scaling is one of the main things, especially for mid to low elo, where you can just get a lot of agency out of this champion. He does a lot of burst potential with like the Q, W, E, R combo onto like an ADC. Like, you can change fights. Like, you can be a fight warping champion. You have those tools within your kit, which I think is a meaningful thing within a tank at the moment. Jax, I really like as a counter pick. He definitely sits towards the high end of the A tier at the moment. I think you should learn Jax in his current state, and yeah, I think if you can find the right matchups for him, he can be a very rewarding pick. That being said though, Mundo currently exists as a very popular champ within mid to low elo, and he's probably what you want to ban if you are playing a lot of Jax at the moment. Mundo, on the other hand, I think tends to be matchup dependent. If you can't freely get out of lane, this champion will be slow to come online, and that is why this pick hasn't been nerfed, or like, albeit he is very frustrating at the moment, and Riot are aware of this. He does have a lot of losing lanes, and if you can't play him in the right spots, he will suffer for it. That being said though, if you can pick him in the right spots against champions and overall compositions which don't have good tools to do with max HP stacking, he can be Thanos. Like, there is no doubt about it. This champion has spots where he can be incredibly, incredibly obnoxious and overpowered. Aatrox, I have him in the A tier at the moment. I do think the Sundered Sky Grass build is really good on him at the moment. Use him as a counter pick and you should be rewarded for it. He can be blindable in certain spots, albeit I do think there are some punishing matchups which you can run into, especially within like the Emerald to Diamond region. Yorick, I have in the A tier at the moment. He's fine. My opinion on Yorick is kind of mixed. Obviously he's actually seeing competitive play still, even with a bunch of the nerfs, especially being like early game skewed, which is really interesting to see. Especially like a lot of the Chinese top laners, like your Flandres, really like this champion and actually have blinded it when certain picks are out of the pool, which is really, really interesting to see. In solo queue, that's not going to happen as much though. You are going to get matched by an Aurelia and you will be miserable. You have to ban Aurelia at the moment as this champion. Like, it's obviously still a very, very prevalent counter pick. There are other matchups which Yorick does struggle into, which are more popular within solo queue, which is why I don't actually recommend him as much as an option at the moment. But I think if you're already comfortable on him, he has great split potential. He's a lot better at team fighting now, which is really nice to see. And I think overall his individual agency is a lot higher. He's also really obnoxious for certain champions to deal with, like champions which can't deal with his schools really struggle against this champion. So that is just something to be aware of. I think if you can pick him in the right spots, he can be quite a rewarding pick. And yeah, I'm going to leave him as an A tier option at the moment. Poppy probably sits towards the high end of the A tier. This pick is really, really good at nullifying certain team compositions. Think you don't want, you don't want to blind her, obviously. There are matchups which you can end up letting free scale, or like you run into a Vladimir, for example, and you will suffer. Like that, those matchups will make Poppy really, really struggle on the top lane and a lot less recommendable. Use it as a counter pick though into matchups where you can you can get value out of your W, or you can get value out of your base damage, and you can kind of freely scale up to be this really obnoxious mid to late game tank option with a really good tool to kind of like team fight with. I think she's a great pick at the moment, and you should really use her like as a good counter pick option within your pool if you're like willing to learn how. That being said, Fiora I still have sat at the top of the A tier. I think Fiora as a counter pick is incredibly powerful at the moment, and the quality of dice change for her this patch is power positive. Like she is going to gain some level of power out of it, not a huge amount. Like I don't think this suddenly warps the champion into something different, but she was already pretty good, and she remains as a high A tier option. I think if you can find the right spots to play Fiora, she is a great champion to for shutting down, especially some of the blind pick deemed blind pick options. Moving on to the S tier then. Going to drop Renekton down. I'm going to drop him back down to the A tier. I still think the pick's really good, and he is a really good mid to he's got a good early game, he's got a good mid game, got a good late game in his current state. You can be quite flexible with the builds. I don't like Eclipse as an item. I've made that pretty clear over time. I think this item is... It often leads you to feel like you're being stunted on like your second, third item. Like if you have Eclipse Cleaver, then you're missing out on Stoic, or you're missing out on Cindered Sky on a lot of champions. And you need these items in a lot of spots. These items are really strong on bruisers. They enable them to teamfight a lot better. And Eclipse is a very selfish solo laning item. That being said though, if you can snowball with an Eclipse, it's really good. So definitely something to be aware of. It's a good snowballing item. But if you're not comfortable playing snowballing, you want something a bit more utility, you can opt into Stridebreaker, you can opt into Cleaver in the right spots, and I do think this pick still sits as a high A2 option. It's just Eclipse as an item is a really, really badly shaped option. It technically isn't for what it wants to do, but I don't like it that much because of what it does. I think it's just it's a greedy item, and I think you can be punished and you can be rewarded for opting into it. It does create very volatile situations, which I'm not as much of a fan of. Moving on to the S tier then. So we lead off with Set, who got nerfed this patch. The nerf was not that big. It was like it was a tap on the slight tap down. I can't remember what the saying is. He's going to be less powerful, and he's a pretty potent champion, especially in mid to low elo, and even in higher MMR brackets he was beginning to pick up pretty good traction. I think as a counter pick option he's still good in higher MMR brackets. I think as just a general option for mid to low elo, he's still a good pick, and I'm still going to leave him in the S tier, even with the slight tap down on his armor. The other 5 picks didn't get adjusted this patch and are going to remain as S tier options. I'm gonna have Mordekaiser here, you can kind of mix and match any of these options. I think Mordekaiser is a great AP juggernaut, pretty good agency, can sometimes struggle to close out games, but if you are very comfortable with the playstyle of this champion, I think he's in a great state at the moment. Gives you a lot of isolated drawing potential, not a bad team fighter if you can isolate the right targets, and I think overall as a pick he's pretty solid at the moment. Probably recommend banning Fiora if you're playing Mordekaiser. Olaf is an incredibly strong answer to certain team compositions and can pair really nicely alongside enchanters, which traditionally are more popular within solo queue. Use him as a counter pick, and if you're comfortable on him, know his lethals, he can stomp a lot of lanes, and I think that is a very rewarding feature of the champion at the moment. Warwick, also really, really good at stomping lanes, does so much damage and can really shut down a lot of the more popular meta options at the moment. That being said, though, he does fall off quite aggressively. Like, he's not a good team fighter, so you do have to close out games early, which is where he kind of gets punished a bit more as a champion. Kale, you're sacrificing a lot of early game, a decent amount of early game agency. I don't think she's quite as bad as she has been in the past. She's a lot harder to punish, especially with like the minion wave changes all the way back at the beginning of the season. That being said, though, yeah, like, her late game agency is still insanely high. Like, as long as you can get like your Nashers, your Rabadon, you're getting towards your level 16, you're really, really strong within the game. You have really good agency. She has great tools at the moment. And I think as a champion, she's incredibly rewarding just to have, especially as a counter pick within your pool. Urgot's still my number one go-to. I'm like an Urgot OCP at this point. I'm almost Grandmaster of the champion. He definitely struggles a lot more in higher MMR brackets. There are a lot of good answers to this champion. And he traditionally has a lot of bad laning matchups. But if you can get to level 9, if you can get to level 13, you spike on your cleaver, you spike on your stacks, he's one of the best champions within the game. He really, really suits the meta, which has kind of existed for like the last 14 patches. Fighting at Atakan with like your 2 items, fighting at like 3rd dragon, sometimes it's like 3rd, 4th dragon, fighting Baron with like a 3rd item. Really, really nice on this champion, as long as you're just like always in your mind paying attention to like your spikes, what you can do within the game, like you're making sure you're getting XP, making sure you're getting gold. You don't really need to play laning face up volatile at the moment, albeit you can if you're looking to really stomp people. Like, you can run the ignite like dark setup, but you can also just run the TP, sit back, get your level 9, and then kind of take over the game. I think the pick is really rewarding at the moment. I really do just recommend having Urgot as a pick within your arsenal at the moment, because he is one of the best, if not just the best mid to low elo option to default on in a lot of situations. Those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.